The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild took the gaming community by storm when it was released on the 3rd of March. It's a couple of months on now, and many of us have defeated Ganon, finished all 120 shrines, or even hit 100%, so we can take a step back and think about how the game could have been better. Don't get me wrong, Breath of the Wild is a fantastic game deserving of the consistent 9 out of 10 and 10 out of 10s that it has been awarded, but nothing is perfect, and I'm sure that we've all noticed a few things that we'd rather have been different, and I've made a list of mine. I've tried to avoid the low-hanging fruit such as the drop in frame rate, though there are a couple of obvious things that I've included on the list because they ended up bugging me quite a lot. Also be warned that there will be a few spoilers, so if you've not played through the game yet, you may want to hold off on watching this video. That being said, here are the 10 ways that I would change Breath of the Wild. I'm starting off with a couple of nitpicks. There are two conditions that Link can experience whilst exploring the wild, being too hot and too cold. Becoming too cold happens in any high altitude area, of which there are plenty throughout Hyrule. By contrast, there is only one hot area, Gerudo Desert, and even then only during the day. During the night, the desert becomes yet another cold area. The giant volcano visible across most of Hyrule is not technically a hot area. Rather, if you go near it, it sets you on fire, and you need a separate fire resistance in order to explore the area. I don't understand why there aren't more hot areas, or why Nintendo decided to give Death Mountain a separate environmental effect. Hot and cold resistant items are equally available across Hyrule, so you'd have thought there'd be more of an even balance between the two. Then again, maybe I'd rather there were just a few less cold areas. There are a couple of high tier armour sets in the game. The Barbarian set and the Ancient set are the two that most people will be using by the end game. Everything else becomes more or less superfluous. It's not a big deal, but it's a shame that plenty of great outfit designs get left behind in favour of two which don't really represent the Legend of Zelda's aesthetic very well. I'd like to see a skin option for armour sets, so that you can use their look while retaining the stats and effects of your best armour. This would be especially good for the novelty sets, which don't see any use once they've been found. And then, at least, we'd be able to roam around Hyrule in the classic green tunic and still feel like a badass. Maybe it's just me, but I don't understand the finer points of cooking. With the right mix of ingredients, you can make elaborate high-class dishes. Clues to their recipes are hidden throughout Hyrule, while their rare ingredients must be farmed from monsters or bought in limited quantities from shops, but I'm not sure why you'd want to bother with any of that. There are a range of ingredients with the hearty prefix. Cooking a single hearty item on its own will produce a dish that refills your health completely and adds a certain number of temporary hearts on top. Hearty radishes, truffles and durians are common enough in the wild and can even be found in shops. These three items alone render all of the other health recovery foods obsolete. Even ignoring them for a second, prime and gourmet meat are also easily retainable from the wild animals of Hyrule. Cooking a few of them together gives you a meat skewer with more health recovery than you could possibly want. Or toss them on a campfire and you can stack a ton of seared steaks into a single item slot. Between hearty items and meat, I don't really see the point of cooking anything else for health recovery purposes. But cooking is for more than health recovery, right? Dishes can also give you buffs and resistances. Well, for one thing, this aspect gets less and less important as you find new armour sets that replicate these buffs. Enhance these armour sets a couple of times and you'll never find yourself cooking with that corresponding buff again. My previous argument can be extended to this aspect of cooking as well. Sure, you can make powerful elixirs using rare bugs and monster parts, but why bother when it's easy to cook a bunch of fruit for a viable similar effect? Maybe it's just me, but for all the possibilities that Breath of the Wild's cooking system offers, most of them seem unnecessary. It seems like a lot of people really dislike the combat shrines. They do put a drain on your limited weapon and food supplies, but I think the core of the problem is that the 20 combat shrines in the game are almost identical. It's just you and a Guardian Scout locked in a room, fighting until one of you is dead. I'd like to have seen this shaken up a little bit, with a greater variety of challenges. At the least, some of the shrines could have contained other kind of guardians, maybe even a huge swarm of baby scouts, but I'd really like to have seen the other mini-bosses in there. How about fighting a Molduga without solid ground to stand on, fighting a Hinox without the use of a bow, or taking on two Taluses at once? The combat shrines should absolutely have been in Breath of the Wild, but they should be unique combat challenges, not the same challenge 20 times. Tingle. Why isn't Tingle in the game? We got Beetle, so why not Tingle? They even teased us with Tingel Island, but he's not there. Weapon durability has been a really contentious issue among players. Some people have praised the added level of challenge and strategy offered by the new system, while others have found their weapons constantly breaking to be an unbearable frustration. I certainly find the inventory system to be a little fiddly to work with, but overall I really like the new approach to weapons. Firstly, limited weapons, along with limited stamina, change the pace of the game in a positive way. Having to balance these different limited resources shifts the game away from simple hack and slash and towards a deeper, more strategic adventure. Secondly, I really like the cycle that limited weapon durability brings. I find myself diving through shrines to find strong weapons, using them to hunt tough enemies until they break, using the resources from the monsters to upgrade my armour, and then using the new armour to help me find and raid more shrines. It's a cycle distinct from, but somewhat similar to games like Monster Hunter, and people have even compared it to Paper Mario Sticker Star and Colour Splash. But while I certainly prefer Breath of the Wild in a lot of ways, these other games offer a feature which is strangely missing from Breath of the Wild, the ability to buy and sell surplus weapons. See, the cycle that I mentioned earlier doesn't always work out perfectly. There are times when you have more weapons than you know what to do with, and other times you need to use whatever you can grab off your latest kills. In most adventure games you can sell redundant weapons and buy new ones from stores all around the world, but not in Breath of the Wild. You can find plenty of people willing to sell you arrows, but nobody who will trade you a bow. Yes, there are a couple of exceptions to this, but the general rule is that if you have an inventory full of weapons then you're going to have to abandon some of them. This leads to a great deal of frustration when you are forced to leave perfectly good weapons behind because your tiny inventory is full. If you could sell excess weapons and buy new ones, even for a nominal amount of money, then the inventory system would flow a lot better. As it is, being unable to buy or sell any of them can make some of your endeavours feel utterly pointless. There are a total of 78 monsters in Breath of the Wild, but the majority are slight variations on a common theme, such as the 7 different kinds of Lizalfoss in the game. Not counting bosses and mini-bosses, I consider there to be 18 unique types of monster in the game, but really there are only 10 that you'll encounter routinely in the wild. Bokoblins, Moblins, Lizalfoss, Choo-Choos, Octoroks, Keese, Stalfoss, Wizrobes, Peblets, and Wolves. This isn't a terrible number, but compare it with the original Legend of Zelda, which had about 25 unique monsters that you'd encounter fairly regularly, again not counting bosses or minor variations. The more recent Twilight Princess has over 18 unique non-boss enemies. Compared to these figures, Breath of the Wild's bestiary does start to feel a little light. I've spent a fair amount of time trying to decide whether the small number of monsters was a problem. For a long time it absolutely wasn't. Monster encounters were uncommon enough, and built with enough varying factors such as camp layout, environmental obstacles and weapon types, that each battle was exciting and rewarding, but as the game went on, I grew less and less interested in fighting. There comes a point quite early on where you don't need any more Moblin Horn or Lizalfoss Tail, and it isn't worth damaging your good weapons, most likely one in shrines, in order to get whatever is locked in the monster chests, so every monster encounter becomes a chore, a needless obstacle to whatever you're trying to do. Often your best course of action is to run past the monster entirely. This is alleviated slightly once silver monsters start appearing. They can be challenging even late game, and they drop gems which makes them feel more worthwhile to kill. But silver monsters don't replace the most annoying enemies in the games, such as the Stalfoss that always need to be decapitated, or the Octoroks which hide underground for long periods of time. It would be great to see a larger number of monster types in Breath of the Wild, a number more suited to a current gen 3D Zelda game. They wouldn't need to be anything inspired, just redesigns of a few of the horde of monsters previously seen throughout the series. To enter the Zora's dungeon you must battle up Zora River while being attacked by Lizalfoss, and then find and bait a Lynel to steal its lightning arrows. To enter the Goron dungeon, you have to rescue Darrek's heir and then journey with him to the peak of Death Mountain. With the Gerudo, you need to find a way to sneak into their city, infiltrate the dreaded Yiga clan and defeat their leader. And with the Rito, you need to do one of the easiest target practice minigames in the history of Zelda. I'm not sure whether Nintendo ran out of ideas or out of time. It really feels like less work went into the Rito questline than that of the other 3 tribes. I think that the Rito deserve more than this. Their designs are great, their town is cool, and they're the only race that can fly. There are so many things that Link could have done with them. I've got my fingers crossed that they'll play a bigger role in the upcoming DLC. A relatively low number of normal monsters is one thing, but 4 very similar bosses is quite another. The final challenge in each of Breath of the Wild's 4 dungeons is a boss fight against the Blight Ganon. These elemental monsters look incredibly similar, except for their weapon choices. Each has a roughly humanoid body, tufts of Ganondorf style hair, and a single guardian eye. I was quite impressed with the design of the first Blight Ganon that I found. I liked the way that traditional aspects of Ganon's identity had been blended with that of a Guardian to create something original, but upon encountering the second boss, I was disheartened to see just how similar it was to the first. Bosses 3 and 4 gave me no surprises at all. I knew what to expect from the moment I entered the dungeon. It doesn't feel like it would have been hard to make the bosses a little more varied. Nintendo could have built them as monstrous versions of Hyrule's tribes, or maybe even corrupted spirits of the champions themselves. They could have drawn on bosses from previous games, or supersized versions of Breath of the Wild monsters. There are a ton of things they could have done to prevent the 4 bosses looking almost identical, and it's rather odd that they didn't. Setting aside the design issues for a moment, your fights against the 4 bosses could have been more distinct as well. A key part of the strategy for killing each one involves shooting them in their central eye to stun them for a few seconds. There are enough enemies in Breath of the Wild with big glowing eyes that you have to shoot. Heck, there's more than enough enemies across the Zelda series with that gimmick. We didn't need another boss with an obvious eyeball weak spot, let alone another 4. In certain parts of each fight you can use your Sheikah Slate in some clever ways to help defeat Ganons, such as moving lightning rods with Magnesis to stun Thunderblight Ganon, or throwing a bomb into Fireblight Ganon's vacuum. These should have been the main focus of the boss fight, rather than just lobbing arrows into their eyes. Maybe this is just my taste though. I've seen lots of people complain that the dungeons are too similar in design, but I rather like that all 4 dungeons have a coherent design style and pattern. I suppose that it's fair enough for others to like the similarity between the 4 bosses as well. One of my big wow moments for the game came just after I left the Great Plateau for the first time and was heading towards Kakariko Village through central Hyrule. I was climbing over some hills when I noticed a peculiar hole in the ground, and a convenient sized rock on a nearby peak. I pushed the boulder into the hole, and a Korok appeared to reward my curiosity. When this happened, I was elated. Suddenly it seemed that every inch of this expansive world would be teeming with secrets to uncover. And in many ways it was. I've had hundreds of hours of fun exploring Hyrule and uncovering its secrets. Yet for all the good times that I've had exploring the world, I'm not sure I can count Korok seed hunting among them. The first few times you discover Koroks it feels great, but when you start doing the same challenges over and over again, it gets a little tired. There are a handful of different types of Korok challenges, and they each get replicated dozens of times over the course of the adventure. Was it really necessary to have 900 Koroks in the game? It only takes half of that to fully upgrade your inventory, and considerably less to have a respectable inventory size. Is this why Anuma said it was impossible to 100% Breath of the Wild? Because nobody in their right mind would bother to collect all 900 seeds? Don't get me wrong, Koroks were a really nice touch, but there didn't need to be nearly as many, and those that were there should have been more varied. So those are my top 10 things that I would change about Breath of the Wild. Do you agree? What are your top 10? Let me know in the comments below.